Good afternoon. We will talk in English, I think, today, since most of the audience is international. And let us admit, English has become the lingua franca of these days. So I greet you in English, but also in Dutch, since we are in Leuven. So welcome to onze ererector, Mark Verwenne. Welcome to Professor Tigchelaar as our celebrated colleague. Welcome to Dora, Mrs. Tigchelaar, and welcome to all of our colleagues from wherever you have come. Welcome to all of former students of Professor Tigchelaar, current students, and above all of you are in some way friends of Professor Tigchelaar. So welcome in Leuven. An emeritus celebration is a special occasion. It has something with looking back, of course. There is an element of gratitude. There is an element of celebration of coming to fulfillment in some way. There is equally a promise to the future. And of course, there is the testimonial of a network of friends and colleagues that has been built over the years. In Leuven, our celebrations for Emeriti always have a few permanent, let me say, substantial elements in it. And I would like to introduce them, classical elements. One is indeed related to the looking back. We will hear an academic biography brought by our president chair of the research unit of biblical studies, Professor Van Hecke. We will have that element of gratitude in looking back on not only what Professor Tigchelaar did or achieved or wrote, but who he was in some kind of what you would call a laudatio, if it would be a doctoral defense. And that one is presented to you by one of his closest colleagues, Johan Leemans. Then we will hear his own current scholarly views after a lifetime of achievement and reflection. We will have a present of gratitude, of course, and since we call this a celebration, we cannot miss the music. So music will also be an element for today. I do not take any of your time anymore for now. This was my welcome and the start of the celebration. And since I have to come up and down always here, I will introduce the two next speakers at once, which is, as I said, the academic biography by Professor Van Hecke, and immediately following the looking back on who Eibert was by the speech of Professor Leemans. Please, Professor Van Hecke, you can take the floor.
Meneer de ererector, mevrouw de decaan, meneer de eredecaan, dear colleagues, dear friends coming from all over the world basically to celebrate Eibert today, dear colleagues from Leuven, dear students, dear friends of Eibert, indeed, as our dean already indicated. It is my joy, my task also here to speak about Eibert and to deliver his academic biography, as it is called, and one might begin Eibert Tigchelaar's biography by noting that he was born in 1959, if you can count well, you knew that, in the unassuming hamlet of Sint Antoniepolder, south of Rotterdam. Following his secondary education in Harderwijk, he earned a bachelor's degree in theology from Utrecht University before relocating to Groningen, indeed, a city that would become central to his life, to pursue a master's degree in theology and a second bachelor's degree in Semitic studies. And from there one could outline his doctoral research, postdoctoral work, professorial positions, his numerous publications, prestigious awards, and other milestones. Yet, can an academic journey truly be distilled into a mere chronology of dates, degrees, publications, research grounds, and awards, impressive as they are in the case of Eibert? Should an academic biography not first and foremost reflect on the impact a scholar has had and continues to have in his discipline? It is no exaggeration to state that Eibert has emerged as the leading scholar of his generation in Dead Sea Scrolls studies, thereby also becoming an influential voice in biblical studies at large and the study of ancient Judaism. The symposium with several of the festive contributors we had these last days underscored again the depth of his impact. It is both a privilege and a pleasure to acknowledge Eibert's lasting contributions to the field as we celebrate his transition to emeritus professor. But even this recognition, and I'm sure many of you will agree, falls short in capturing the essence of Eibert's academic biography. Those of us who have had the joy and the privilege of working with him know him not only as a scholar of exceptional erudition and meticulousness, but also as a person of extraordinary generosity and unpretentiousness. The first extended conversation I recall having with Eibert took place in the early 2000s when we walked together from a meeting to Amsterdam Central Station. It was after an OTW meeting, OTW meeting, I think, along the canals of Amsterdam. At that time, he had recently been awarded a prestigious NWO research grant, published 2 significant monographs in the field, and contributed to both the official text edition of a substantial collection of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Cave 11, and the study edition of the scrolls found on the bookshelves of all students and scholars in the field. In contrast, I had only recently completed my PhD and secured a very limited and modest teaching position. While I no longer remember the specifics of our conversation, Eibert, I vividly recall how you made me feel, like a peer, like an equal. You showed, Eibert, keen interest in my work and even expressed enthusiasm for my limited teaching opportunities, adding that you yourself hoped to engage in more teaching, but you were so busy doing research. Years later, when Eibert and I became close colleagues here in Leuven, I came to understand that this simply was who he is. He's generous with his time and attention, generous in his feedback, sharp as it may be, and generous in sharing his expertise and experience, never looking down on anyone. If anything, this generosity defines his academic biography, an erudite scholar, an internationally recognized expert, and a colleague and mentor who shares his knowledge and skills. Actually, I could conclude here, but the genre of an academic biography necessitates that I provide some more insight into the life and the career that shaped Eibert into the esteemed colleague and scholar we celebrate today. A formative experience, I am sure, perhaps not in his trajectory as an academic, but certainly as a person, was his childhood in the highlands of Kenya, Africa. From the age of 2 to 10, he lived in the town of Eldoret, if I am well informed, where his father worked as a Protestant minister. This early exposure to different cultures, languages, and perspectives undoubtedly, as a child, contributed to the depth and the breadth of Eibert's intellectual and personal worldview. Academically speaking, a pivotal moment in Eibert's career was attending 2 Ex Oriente Lux lectures by Adam van der Woude and Herman van Stipthout during his studies in Utrecht. Legend has it that these lectures inspired him to actually move to Groningen to study under van der Woude, ultimately leading to his doctorate in 1994, published soon after in the Oud-testamentische Studien under the title Prophets of Old and the Day of the End, Zechariah, the Book of Watchers, and Apocalyptic. And I had this thought while preparing this, since Adam was his Dr. Vater, it occurred to me that Eibert should therefore be called a Ben Adam. A title most befitting for the Mensch, we already mentioned the term, for the Mensch, the Ben Adam that Eibert truly is. From his doctoral defense until 2006, Groningen, and in particular the university's Qumran Institute, was Eibert's academic home. Founded in 1961 by Adam van der Woude to advance Dead Sea Scrolls research, the institute thrived under the leadership of a true pioneer. Van der Woude had defended his own dissertation on the Qumran community as early as 1957, just a decade after the scrolls discovery, or at least becoming known, and indeed 2 years before Eibert was born. This dynamic academic environment shaped Eibert as a researcher, while he in turn made significant contributions to the Institute, maintaining those close collaborations in various capacities ever since and up to today. It is therefore a great honor to welcome Van der Woude's successors as directors of this esteemed institute, Professor Florentino Garcia Martinez and Professor Mladen Popovic, who is sitting there, yes. During his many years in Groningen, in different capacities at the faculty and the institute, Eibert produced several truly landmark publications. Notably, he co-edited, alongside with Van der Woude and Florentino, the official Discoveries in the Judean Desert, DJD, edition of the scrolls and fragments from Cave 11, one of the major Qumran caves, for which the Institute had secured exclusive publication rights. And ever since, Cave 11 has been affectionately known as the Dutch Cave. At the same time, and once again in collaboration with Florentino, Eibert provided the scholarly community, especially non-specialists, with the study edition of the relevant non-biblical scrolls. This 2-volume resource presents a transcription of the original text, a parallel English translation, and a comprehensive bibliography, significantly improving access to these important documents, especially for non-specialists. A grant from the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences enabled Eibert to dedicate the next years of his career to the study of 4Q instruction, a key early Jewish sapiential text. He pioneered new material and literary analyses, culminating in his highly influential 2001 publication, To Increase Learning for the Understanding Ones, also mentioned during our symposium, in the STDG series, a milestone in the field. That same year, he secured a major research grant from the newly established NWO funding program, providing opportunities for his first PhD students. In 2006, Eibert left the Low Countries for the lowlands of Florida, the flattest state of the US, when he was appointed as full professor at the Florida State University in Tallahassee. During his 3 years in the US, Eibert made a lasting impact on both graduate and undergraduate communities, particularly in Dead Sea Scrolls research and material philology, while also playing a key role in strengthening the university's research unit. And it's such a joy also to welcome 2 of your students from that time, Shem and Seth, who were with us already the last days. In 2009, Eibert returned to Europe as a research professor at KU Leuven, succeeding indeed Florentino Garcia Martinez in this prestigious role. Eibert continued his rigorous scholarship on the Dead Sea Scrolls at KU Leuven, producing over 50 journal articles and notes and counting, alongside 10 edited books or thematic journal issues, often in collaboration with both senior and junior scholars. And this is to say nothing of the immense time and effort he has dedicated to editing the work of others, serving as editor for prestigious journals and series such as the Journal for the Study of Judaism, Dead Sea Discoveries, and the studies on the texts of the Desert of Judah, among others. And his groundbreaking contributions earned him KU Leuven's 2017 Pioneers Award for Research Excellence in the Humanities and Social Sciences. Beyond his research, Eibert was also distinguished himself as an outstanding supervisor and teacher. His highly accomplished group of doctoral students, many of whom are present here in different capacities today, consistently praise his precise yet constructive feedback, his approachability, and remarkable generosity again. One more example of this generosity: last September, in the final days before his retirement, when it was barely still administratively possible, Eibert chose to take up the supervision of one more doctoral student, providing invaluable support not only to the student, but also to the research unit. In Leuven, Eibert taught a wide range of courses, and of course he taught another wide range of courses back in Florida, But here in Leuven, from advanced master classes on prophets and scribes to Hebrew and even Ugaritic language, his teaching extended from introductory BA courses on biblical literature, even to the history of interreligious contacts between Christianity and Islam. Notably, he also co-taught the Literary, Textual, and Historical Methods course for many years, alongside our next speaker, Johan Leemans, who will undoubtedly share more about Eibert's role as a teacher and a mentor. Finally, like all professors, Eibert also took various administrative roles. Notably, he served for many years as the coordinator of our research unit of biblical studies. And I also look back fondly on our shared presidency over the Old Testament Society in Belgium and the Netherlands, and the many opportunities it gave us to travel the Low Countries together. Through these experiences, and simply as close colleagues, I have come to know Eibert as refreshingly efficient in administrative matters, fulfilling his duties, but without giving them undue weight, and without ever personally seeking the spotlight. Dear Eibert, I am so happy that we continue to have some shared projects together, so that I will not have to miss your occasional words of wisdom, your advice and perceptive feedback, your generosity. But for now, let me just take this opportunity to express my most sincere gratitude, personally, but also in the name of our research unit, for everything you have contributed and continue to contribute to the field, and simply for who you are. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you. I was asked to say a few words during this celebration in which we honor Eibert's academic achievements, express our gratitude for his manifold contributions, and in which we give words to our appreciation for who he is as a person. I have first two preliminary remarks. The first is, and I really want to say this, it has been for me a privilege to attend yesterday and today the symposium in Eibert's honor. It was impressive to witness the Amicitia Qumranica and a joy to see the many ways in which appreciation and friendship were shown to Eibert. Eibert, who has been and still is many things to many in this room: a doctor father, a mentor, a teacher, a colleague, a co-organizer, a co-sufferer, a co-director, a fellow laborer in the vineyard of Dead Sea Scrolls studies and Second Temple Judaism, and above all, for many, a good friend. Secondly, Pierre and I have exchanged our texts beforehand, and we discovered that with some degree of variation, we're actually saying very much the same things about Eibert. There are three explanations for that, possible ones. The first is a lack of imagination on our part. The second thing is that Eibert, there is not too much to say about him. Or the third explanation, the one I would defend here, is that we're saying the same things because Eibert really is a man of one piece. So no missing pieces here. The first time I met Eibert was exactly 20 years ago in Groningen during a Themes in Biblical Narrative conference. I got in Groningen because Florentino took me with him. Florentino was driving from Barcelona to Groningen, and so he kindly stopped in Leuven to pick me up. So I got there, and it really was a great symposium. The topic was the prophet Balaam. And the atmosphere of the gathering was open, was friendly, was encouraging, conducive to dialogue, learning from each other, great coffee breaks, really everything you expect. And after my talk on some examples of the patristic reception of Numbers 24:17, Eibert approached me and kindly pointed out some continuities between the patristic material I had covered and some Jewish Hellenistic texts he was familiar with. Now, that happens more often, that after conference somebody comes to you and say, maybe you should have looked in that book, or there's an interesting article about that, but that's not the way Tigchelaar works. He, with a friendly, encouraging smile, handed me a slip of paper with precise references to some source texts I really should have a look at. This shows a willingness to help, a generosity in sharing knowledge, and also a concern to move scholarship forward, to make it better. Then I lost track of Eibert, and I guess he lost track of me. And then he was appointed in 2009 here in Leuven, and we got to know each other better. And especially since 2014, Pierre already mentioned it, because since that year we have been co-teaching a course with the almost messianic title, Literary, Textual and Historical Methodologies, plural. This is a mandatory course for all our students in the first year of the Research Master when they are majoring in Biblical Studies or in History of Church and Theology. Content-wise, we deal with sources and scholarship covering the earliest strata of the Hebrew Bible up to oral history and archival sources of the 20th century and everything in between. Beyond familiarizing students with relevant approaches for these fields and methods, our ultimate goal was to sharpen the students' scholarly attitude, to instill in them that quintessential quality of what the French call le doute méthodique. This class always has given us much to talk about, and it confirmed that my growing experience with Eibert's helpfulness and generosity had not been accidental, but that it simply is who he is as a person. An example, I never had to look at the Toledo page of the class. And I discovered a few more things. For instance, Eibert is a great encourager. He challenges students to move further, do more, read more, not to be content too soon with their work. And he does so kindly, with a smile, but also with unwavering perseverance. Second thing, he made sure everybody in the group felt seen, was encouraged to contribute something, ask questions, proffer suggestions, remain involved. He made, without any effort, meaningful connections with students from all corners of the world, extending these exchanges also beyond the classroom, and he did so with spontaneity and a great naturel. Humor, jokes, laughing during class, it was permitted, but within reasonable limits. After all, Johan, we are pursuing a goal that is very lofty. We are sharpening the students' scholarly acumen, we are inviting them to look beyond their own topic, and we want them to learn from each other. And so did we, Eibert and I, learning from our students and learning from each other. At times, this would lead to disagreements amongst the two of us, which caused some bewilderment with the students. The breadth of research topics covered made us expounding our own knowledge too. And so Eibert had to learn about patristics, medieval mysticism, Jansenism, the Second Vatican Council, and many more topics. He really had to learn. In the beginning, he asked me, Johan, so the Second Vatican Council, I guess that means there has also been a First Vatican Council. Yes, Eibert, there has been one. But learning new things, that never was a problem. Because Eibert Eibert is really a prime example that the first task for any academic is to continue learning new things, to keep reading and studying. Hence also, and this hasn't been touched upon by Pierre, hence also his interest in the Book Heritage Lab. The Book Heritage Lab is a space in our library dedicated with the necessary tools, dedicated to the diagnosis, research, restoration, and conservation of medieval manuscripts, early printed books, and documentary heritage. Eibert was a regular visitor, and he was involved in some projects, that's true, and his expertise for those projects was relevant, that was also true, but he went there more often than was strictly necessary. So I suspected he really felt attracted by the technology available there and by its potential to really look into the material aspect of those medieval books. Having heard Mladen this morning, now I even better understand Eibert's interests. Then again something else. As a scholar and as a teacher, Eibert's concern was with what he called the field with capital. Mostly this meant the field of Dead Sea Scrolls, Second Temple Judaism, but often more broadly biblical studies and humanities as a whole. Eibert speaks a lot about the field. He wants the field to flourish, and he did contribute to this in several ways beyond his own research, forming, mentoring leaders for the next generations of academics in the field. He has always been and still remains a member of the editorial boards of many of the main journals and series of the field, and he spends much time in that. All of this is a labor of love, and its sole aim is contributing to the overall quality of research. In all those roles, I've seen him practicing what I would call merciful severity. He puts the bar high for himself, for his students and all others, junior or senior. I've seen severe review reports he wrote, but even with regard to contributions with major shortcomings, Eibert will always underline the positive aspects too. He doesn't hesitate to point out weaknesses in the argumentation or in the Hebrew, but always in a generous way. He made me see that merciful severity is a good thing. Then it has already been mentioned by Pierre, Eibert has served the field also when there was no real credit in it for him. I've seen him doing work on edited volumes without his name being mentioned anywhere at all. Sometimes he even didn't make the preface. I've seen him giving free advice to students for whom he acted as a mentor without any official acknowledgement. At conferences, so I'm told, many junior and less junior scholars freely get his expertise and assistance. He makes himself easily available and is happy to give his time to conversations, preferably over coffee, about intuitions, budding projects, ongoing research, or almost finished products. As long as the field flourishes, it's all okay for Eibert. This is also the reason why recently he started writing brief notes with additions of snippets, small snippets of texts. There's not too much credit in it, but it's good for the field, so there you go, Eibert does it. Eibert was also a professor at his faculty, we shouldn't forget that. And his commitment to our faculty here in Leuven reflect the same priorities, the same attitude. He was a reliable research unit coordinator, member and secretary to the doctoral committee. And in those roles too, he was always willing to give help or advice, very pragmatic and very down to earth. Never take a detour when there is a shortcut available. He helped addressing some difficult issues and thereby paired a candid communication style to surprisingly soft empathy. Longer meetings without really concrete goals, though, never have been his cup of tea. And he has developed some creative ways of, let's call it, a win-win situation out of these. Just one creative example I remember as if it was yesterday, though it happened more than a decade ago. There really was a problem. Eibert really had to be at the meeting of the faculty board. He really had to be there. But his friend really needed him to be at home. So instead of making a choice, Eibert brought his four-legged friend to the meeting. Hekkie behaved very well. Came in, looked around, drank from the trug Eibert had brought, and fell asleep on the carpet Eibert had taken with him. The dog fell asleep, but not after some emphatic yawns delivered with impeccable timing. It's time to conclude. You will be missed, dear friend, because of what you have done for the field, for our faculty here, but much more so for what you have been to many here in Leuven and elsewhere, often discreetly and often without reaping credit for it. Fortunately, you are not that far away. Somehow I get the feeling our conversation is not yet over. But for now, I wish you the very best. Bene vale, how we good, and enjoy your valedictory lecture. You do it only once. Thank you.
Zoals ik zei, geen feest zonder muziek. En na 2 toespraken zijn we wel toe aan een beetje muziek. Ook de muziek was bijzonder en komt er vandaag op bijzondere wens van Eibert zelf. Geen heel klassieke dingen, geen heel voorspelbare dingen, maar prachtige creatieve opvoeringen. Ik leid u graag in. Eli Hoopman en Ewout Lehoek creëerden 2 muzikale collages waarbij Eli tekst brengt en Ewout muzikale bewerkingen. Ewout Lehoek is performer, maker en zanger en, u zag daar al staan, cellist. Onder de vleugels van muziektheater Transparant maakt hij voorstellingen met de groep Les Âmes Perdues. Ik hoop dat u dat niet hoort vandaag. Maar momenteel speelt hij in de Opéra Nationale de Paris Neki Cool, een opera voor kinderen. Eli Hoopman van haar kant is schrijver en performer. Ze is als artistiek onderzoeker verbonden aan het Koninklijk Conservatorium van Antwerpen met haar project Performing Mesopotamian Magic. U ziet de link al. Momenteel rondt ze haar master in taal en letterkunde hier aan onze KU Leuven af met een thesis over het gebed van Namodus. Onder begeleiding van Kathleen Abraham en wie dacht u, Eibert Tigchelaar. In een eerste muzikaal intermezzo dat we nu zullen beluisteren, straks een tweede na de lezing van Eibert, luisteren we naar muzikale bewerkingen van Across the Universe van de Beatles. Het is niet Across the Field, maar misschien is de field wel de universe vandaag, dus Across the Universe. Jullie zijn welkom op het podium.
Okay. Hi. First, I will read you a poem, or maybe I wait till my colleague is ready. Yeah? I will read you a poem by one of your esteemed colleagues, Shlomi Efrati. Trees Against Sky. The naked trees, the forked, bare branches, framed heaven as a gentle, cold ink sketch. The gray, wet sky came through. Now leaves break out, amazingly green, cover and shelter, and make the world close. I would like to invite you, if only for a short moment, to enter a different wavelength. I made a collage of words and phrases that I selected from texts that Professor Tigchelaar co-authored or authored and sent to me, and also a book that Seth Bledsoe gave me that Tigchelaar co-authored. This is an aesthetic compilation. Just let the words glide by. This is a palette cleanser, so you will. Physical, as well as scribal, clearly physical, categorized cream, systematically calamus, handwriting quality criteria, carefulness, and consistency of script. Manuscript quality quote, continued co-production in column 33, which contains word, very irregular word. Unwritten, not working, codexvondsten, codices van Calice in de Daklee-oase, boekrollen, erg klein begrip bedraagt, 11 dagen langer, later, including the word for grass. Given the goes, grass also goes at the beginning. Given fragment who haplography photograph garden city on the authenticity, the size of lines, particular styles, more than, slightly more, might be absence.
Words are flying out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither out in paths, they slip away across the universe. Pools of sorrow, waves of joy are drifting through my open mind, possessing and caressing me. Jai Guru Deva Om.
Manuscriptnummers formeel maken met vermeld men meer stammen, ouderdom. Mogelijke om voor 70 na Christus, 4e eeuw na Christus, 2e tussen een jaar en 12 voor Christus. Lofprijzingen, waarschijnlijk Damaskusgeschrift, waarschijnlijk. Fragmentarische, gedeeltelijk gemeenschap, fragmentje. Gedachtenwereld, gemeenschap, uitvoerige strafcodex, stichting. Waf en Yod, supralineair, with or without final noon, figure fit, difficult, different. Hazahav, shalach, shalacha, shevaya, asseh, enzovoort. Stijl, behoort, woordgebruik. Stijl, stichting, vasthouden, geesten. Duisternis, dualisme, inleiding, bedoeling dit. De 354, de kalender, de avondhemelgedeelte. the degree of the downstroke of noon, diagonal of Aleph.
Nothing's gonna change my world. Nothing's gonna change my world. Nothing's gonna change my world.
The degree of curvature of the downstroke of noon, part of the handwriting quality, archaic extending quality. Style, 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 and handwriting, talrijkheid, sterren. The bottom wit between the letters regularity. Linnen geklede, elegant, elegant professional principles of regularity. Samen vegetariërs. Hangen, samenhangen, spacing. Substandard principles, hangen, samenhangen. Dwazen. Dwazen van hart deze nacht. De 9e, 7e, half 7e, deze 9e nacht.
Well, that brings us to the central part of this evening's celebration. And as I said, elements of looking back, elements of gratitude, but also elements of looking forward from the present. And that is what Professor Tigchelaar's own lecture this evening, I should say, will bring to you. In a nice, I should say, nice wordplay, reading the writing of scrolls in search of early Jewish reading practices. Professor Eibert Tigchelaar, I wish you a very welcome to this floor, and I'm sure that everybody is eager to hear you. Please come.
Geachte ererector Vervenne, geachte decaan mevrouw Lemmerlijn, geachte professoren, beste collega's en studenten. Don't worry, I'll continue in English. Dear members of the many communities to which I have belonged for so many years, colleagues and students of the KU Leuven, and so many scholars in the, and the word comes again, field of Bible, Dead Sea Scrolls, and ancient Judaism from Europe, Israel, and the United States. Dear Dean, I will just give you a few reflections back and then point forward to the future. Over the past, Over the past 30 years, most of my research has been centered on the Dead Sea Scrolls, as you heard, a fragmentary collection of Jewish manuscripts from around the turn of the era. From the very beginning, I rearranged fragments found in the Judean desert and constructed ancient Hebrew and Aramaic book scrolls. And though my promoter was Adam van der Woude, my teacher in this respect was Florentino Garcia Martinez. Don't be afraid that I'll drop all kinds of names, but I want to give credit to Florentino. I aimed at reading and understanding their content, and I recall many hours on Sundays of reading together the Hodayot. I examined their script with all my colleagues, past and present in Groningen, and their orthographic practices with Leuven colleagues. I tried to profile the individuals from skilled scribes to untrained scribblers who used pen and ink to write on skin or papyrus, and gradually I wondered what happened to their manuscripts after they had written them. Were they read? And by whom and when? What can we know about the scrolls and reading practices? Many of the Scrolls colleagues present here have approached this question by analyzing the sections from the rule of the community that refer to communal eating, reading together, studying together, discussing, and communal blessing. But also, the rule of the community refers to individual study and interpretation on behalf of the community. They, my colleagues, have filled some of the gaps by turning to comparative evidence. For example, Philo of Alexandria's descriptions of reading and study among the Therapeutae, references to synagogal and private reading in Luke and Acts, practices in Hellenistic and Roman period education, associations of philosophical schools, or the ample rabbinic literature on books and reading. And I got actually stuck because I wanted to engage everything that my colleagues have been writing but decided not to do it. I will not rehearse all these excellent studies, most from the past 10 years, on the interaction of reading and study or on reciting memorized text and performance in ancient Judaism. Instead, I want to look at the materiality of reading, found described in a few scrolls and indicated by material aspects of manuscripts from the so-called Library of Qumran and of a Psalms fragment found at a weaver's workshop in the fortress of Masada. The term Library of Qumran is a fuzzy label for all the scrolls found in the caves, but sometimes it triggers imaginations of stacks, a library reading room, tasks of the librarian, different subsections of the library, and prerogatives of priestly scholars like professors. In any case, this library or collection of scrolls is very diverse. There are different literary genres, large variations regarding the numbers of copies of books, different languages and scripts are used, written on parchment and papyrus, there are different spelling or orthographic practices, etc. Some of these are relevant for the act of reading. For example, literacy training would have begun with the Hebrew-Aramaic script common at the turn of the era, and not everyone would have been able to read also the Old Hebrew script, let alone the special scripts which scholars have called cryptic. Also, spelling practices which add letters to indicate some vowels were meant to facilitate reading for less skilled readers. But there are also other varieties which may indicate whether and how scrolls were written for reading. Paleographically, with respect to quality or skill of writing, codicologically, with respect to, for example, size, length, and quality of writing surface, and paratextually with respect to markers indicating possible or actual use of specific manuscripts. In short, what I want to do is I want to draw the evidence of the scrolls as material objects into the discussion of reading and reading practices at Qumran and in related groups. These constitute another kind of evidence than the literary and comparative data, but broader, the variety of the evidence of the Dead Sea Scrolls adds a new perspective to literacy in Judea around the beginning of the era. Today, we start with the evidence from the collections found in the caves near Qumran. They have been labeled libraries, suggesting communal ownership and use. But not all manuscripts seem to have been written for communal use. Some scribes wrote neatly and with care, even calligraphically. Others wrote fluently, but with a rapid and careless hand, and a few even clumsily. Some manuscripts written in those clumsy hands could have been exercises, while slightly more advanced writers penned short scrolls, perhaps as private copies of parts of scripture or, for example, the rule of the community. Now, one such example of either an exercise or a private copy on a scrap of parchment is formed by the remnants of Psalm 89 and its Siklum is 498G. And you can see it on the image. And if your Hebrew is very rusty and almost non-existent nowadays, I can go through it, but this is a real mess. But nonetheless, people have been extremely interested in this text because it deviates from the psalm that we now know. Question is, of course, why it deviates. I won't go into all kinds of details because at some point we want to stop here. Scribes wrote differently, but readers too varied in their reading and performance. Part of the Damascus document, a large composite text with admonishments, rules for the organization of small communities, and halakha, elaborations on religious law, restricts the functions of some priests. One of those sections disqualifies priests who might not be able to read the text of the book of the law correctly or intelligibly. There are gaps in the preserved constructed text, and the gaps are marked by dots, but the remains run as follows. Anyone who is dim-eyed, something is missing, and who is not fast in understanding, and anyone whose speech is too soft, or who speaks on and on without the appropriate pauses in his speech to make himself understood, none of these shall read aloud from the book of the law, lest he, the reader, cause error in matters dealing with capital punishment. And then the gaps are filled in this case by the text in italics, but instead one of his brothers, the priests in the service, shall read instead of that priest. Now, 4 possible shortcomings are preserved in this text. Actually, it's a construct text from 3 different manuscripts, including bad eyesight and a frail voice. So if bad eyesight was a disqualification, then it would imply reading aloud that would imply reading aloud text from a manuscript. But some of the letters of bad eyesight are unfortunately missing, and the reading is not entirely certain. The 2 other reading restrictions, though, relate to how manuscripts were written and could be read. First, someone who is not fast in understanding. This has been taken to refer to those priests who are simpletons, mentally incompetent, discussed elsewhere in the same work and also in later rabbinic works. Not all priests were smart or could even read. So this has often been taken to mean that. However, not being fast in understanding could more plausibly, and one could also refer to rabbinic text for that, refer to the act of reading. Reading aloud Hebrew or other Semitic texts without vocalization and interpunction requires that while reading aloud, one quickly scans the following text in order to grasp the meaning of the full clause. Not being able to do this will result in mistakes. The other defect is reading on and on without the appropriate pauses, which might easily happen when reading from text without interpunction, or as in some manuscripts, even without using appropriate spaces in between the words. Now, most scholars, and some of you may know this text, most scholars think, incorrectly in my opinion, that the defect referred to is actually stuttering or staccato talking, which is the exact opposite from what is actually described here. And if you want to have background for my interpretation, you can come to me later. Interestingly, comparable failures to the failures that the readers might make also occur in the copying of manuscripts. For example, some scribes, when copying from another manuscript, a Vorlage, apparently could not or did not memorize short sense units, but copied word by word. Sometimes jumping lines, splitting words, misreading the original, not realizing that what they thought to read in the Vorlage made no sense in the text they were copying. Now, a clear case of this kind of defective manuscript is 4Q9, one of the Genesis manuscripts from K4, where there are actually many mistakes, among one of which is that the scribe miscopied asu in the phrase zot asu, do this, as asar or osher or whatever, 10 or riches, which makes no sense at all in the phrase. You can see it in the red there. Now, scholars gleaning such manuscripts only or mainly for textual variants should anticipate that rare readings are possibly errors by non-professional scribes. I think it is unlikely that such defective manuscripts would have been read aloud communally. At best, they may have served as personal copies, or perhaps such manuscripts were already discarded in antiquity. The section on priests barred from reading aloud is the only one in the Dead Sea Scrolls which actually specifies the book from which to read, namely Sefer HaTorah, the book of the Torah, and explains that such priests should not read to prevent them making mistakes in matters dealing with capital punishment. You understand that that is very important. The term Book of the Torah may refer to the Pentateuch, or perhaps to one of the legal parts of the Pentateuch. In a recent article on handwriting quality, we arranged all Hasmonean-type scripture manuscripts in 3 categories: elegant, professional, or substandard. Now, actually, our work just focused on the elegant manuscripts, but our classification also shows, which I just noticed a week ago, that Hasmonean-style Pentateuch manuscripts are largely elegant or professional, and only exceptionally, among them 4Q9, substandard. And this may be no coincidence. Substandard copies of the Pentateuch, like 4Q9, let alone, that would be even worse, of its legal parts, may have been discarded because they were not good. Yet, the term Book of the Torah is also ambiguous. Within the context of the Qumran manuscripts, this term Book of the Torah might also cover other texts, especially, I propose, the Temple Scroll, which refers to itself as this law, and which includes many transgressions that are to be punished by death, even more than you would find in the Pentateuch. The setting of the priest's public reading from the Book of the Torah is not clear from the text, nor from other Dead Sea Scrolls. Fragments of 2 different manuscripts, 4Q264a and 4Q421, preserve a work on Sabbath laws, and one of its sections deals with permitted and prohibited speech on the Sabbath, triggered by Isaiah 58:13, which at its end tersely discourages quote, pursuing one's business and speaking a word on the Sabbath. Two prohibitions that have been interpreted differently and in many different ways from antiquity till the present day. Just compare modern Bible translations and you will see it goes into all directions. What does it mean? The beginning of this section is very damaged, referring to singing and all the things I'm emphasizing are in red on the slide, priests, burnt offerings and sacrifices, reading the writing of a book scroll, and reading and teaching. The next lines, better preserved, forbid speech related to business, ending with the conclusion that one may only speak holy words and bless God. The details are lost, but it is clear that this fragment mentions a range of verbal and textual activities on Sabbath, all of which can be associated with literary works or manuscripts found at Qumran, containing songs, law, perhaps prophets, study, and blessings. And perhaps the Divrei Kodesh could also be prayers, but I have to think about that. The title of the present lecture, Reading the Writing of Scrolls, goes back to a phrase from this section which I constructed by combining the readings of fragments from two copies of Sabbath laws collections, and they are in here. This is only a snippet. Actually, the one fragment is much larger, but just to show it large to you. This phrase, Megillat Sofer Lekro B'chitfo, uniquely mentions the physical artifact of a scroll, Megillah, the conceptual notion of a book, Sefer, the act of reading, Lekro, and that what is materially read, its writing, or perhaps text, Ketaf. The explicit mention of both the artifact and the materially written text indicates here, as in the section on the disqualified. Where's my page 9? Just give me a moment. As in the section on the disqualified priests, the reading from a physical scroll. And I'm emphasizing that to contrast it to suggestions that one recited from memory. Such references to books, reading, and physical scrolls are missing, materially or textually, when singing, speaking holy words, and blessings are mentioned. So it's only once here. So one question which I'm raising here could be which books would have been read and studied on Sabbath. Comparative and later data suggest at least law, Pentateuch or the books of Moses, and prophets. But one should, I think, also allow for the possibility that other books of law or prophecy might also have been read. I will look at two questions regarding materiality and actual artifacts. One is which, and you will think you can never answer that question, one is which of the many scrolls found at Qumran might have been read aloud on Sabbath or at any other meeting. The other, whether the many manuscripts found at Qumran containing prayers, psalms, hymns, blessings, were read at communal meetings, Sabbath or otherwise, or had a different use. These two questions can only be answered tentatively. I will discuss a few aspects of a material, scribal, and paratextual nature. Materially, most of the scrolls suffered greatly after their deposition, and sometimes perhaps even before, in the caves. Yet, in a few cases, there's evidence of ancient wear and tear and subsequent restoration. And I will only mention, and we could mention a few other ones, but I will only mention 3 well-known cases. What you see here is the left part of the last column of the great Isaiah scroll, from Cave 1. It has suffered from use, resulting in damage of the surface of the skin and loss of the letters. So the picture on the left is just a zooming in on what you see there. And actually, and not everyone writes about it, but we have someone in the audience who probably knows an answer. You see all these cracks here, and whether that has resulted from the scrolling or from the handling with the hand, I will hear that later from the specialist here. In any case, it has resulted in damage of the surface. Now, an ancient user or reader of the text attempted to overwrite the text, but he did that with a pen with a thicker nib, as you can see, and that makes a problem because in the beginning it goes, but gradually he moves beyond the text and has to try to solve it. He tried to re-ink the letters, but because the nib needed more space, it went wrong. The writing is cramped and still does not fit, and the re-inker started to make a range of mistakes. This Isaiah scroll actually shows many signs of restorations and secondary interventions. Now, the first sheet of what one might call the Great Temple Scroll from Cave 11 apparently was damaged and was replaced probably by the middle of the 1st century Common Era by a new sheet. Now, the only thing that you can really see on this image is that you have this is a different kind of skin on the left and another skin on the right, and those of you can see badly, but actually the script is clearly different on between left and right. Interestingly, and I'm not sure whether anyone ever mentioned that, the text on the replacement sheet, so what you see on the right, is written in a hand very similar or identical to that of 11Q11, which was also found in Cave 11. Major parts of the Samuel scroll, which is now not preserved anymore as a scroll, but in several hundreds of smaller and larger fragments from Cave 4, 4Q51, major parts of this scroll required, for whatever reason, the skin was too thin or whatever, it required additional physical support, and papyrus and leather patches have been attached to its back. Now, this scroll, as one or two of you really know well, this scroll is famous among textual critics, and its text has actually been the study of many dissertations. A new research topic, I'm just throwing it out here if anyone wants to pick it up, would be a thorough physical examination of the entire scroll, its patches, and the hitherto unstudied writing on the papyrus. I admit it is difficult to read, but if someone really gives it a go, then you might succeed in doing that. Such restorations suggest a heavy use of these large manuscripts, though we still cannot indicate whether they were read aloud at Sabbath meetings or studied in other meetings or even in another way. Another type of evidence, textual, of reading or use of manuscripts is provided by corrections or additions in scrolls. Now, corrections and additions are sometimes by the original scribe, some possibly by teachers, but there are also ones made by later users and readers of the scroll, recognizable paleographically by a different and sometimes younger handwriting, or often just by the nib and the writing thickness, thinness, etc. Such interventions by later readers and users correct mistakes or change the spelling, but sometimes later users knew variants or other versions of the text and corrected towards that version. Now, a good and interesting example is 4Q175, called 4Q Testimonia, a single sheet, so it's not really a scroll, with biblical quotations. And the original quotation in this sheet of Deuteronomy 33, 8-11 was based on a text that is quite different from the Hebrew one we know now, and in part corresponding with the Septuagint and one other Dead Sea Scroll, 4Q35. And then comes a later corrector who changed many, but not all variants, so that the present text has become at least more similar to the Masoretic text. Now, in this case, unfortunately, I cannot determine whether those corrections were based on a memorized or on a written text. Back to the great Isaiah scroll. In this scroll, at least 4 later users have added verses, not only correcting a mistake, but they added verses over the course of perhaps as much as 1 century. Now, in some of those cases, the original scribe had left 1 line uninscribed. Probably the text that the original scribe had been copying was already damaged at that place, and he left a line open for filling it in later. But in other cases, the original scribe may have accidentally dropped some words, a line, or an entire verse, or he may have copied an older form of the text. Now, the first of the users to leave an insertion in the great Isaiah scroll is the one who added Isaiah 47 with the 4 dots to represent the name of God in the phrase, the breath of the Lord. This is a very famous picture, and you can find it in 1,000 pages on the internet, etc. Scholars disagree whether this verse, Isaiah 47, chapter 40, verse 7, had been omitted by accident or because an older form of Isaiah still lacked this verse. At any rate, the first inserter added the text of this verse, but, as you can see, in clumsily written letters, and also with several spelling mistakes. I propose that this scribe knew this famous section by heart, Isaiah 40, why it's one of the most important sections from the Hebrew Bible, and supplied the missing verse in the scroll. But because he did not copy the verse from another scroll of Isaiah, he made a range of mistakes, spelling mistakes, for example, twice in the word for grass, etc. He made a mess of it. Fortunately, this first inserter did not know the other missing sections by heart and left their insertion to later users. An entirely different matter is the blank line in the same great Isaiah scroll, where the text at the very end of Isaiah 34:17 and the entire Isaiah 35 verses 1-2 was missing. Perhaps, probably, another case of defects in the scroll that was originally copied. Now, if you read the text as it is without the insertion and just try to understand it, many ancient readers may not even have noticed that something was missing. 35:1-2 is a small poem that is consistent of itself, and if you leave out this poem, of course, exegetes will disagree, but as from a literary perspective, if you leave it out, nothing will be lost. So a reader might just read on. Therefore, it took some generations, perhaps even up to a century, before the missing text finally was added. In a small and neat handwriting, a later scribe inserted the missing words from the very end of 34:17 and the small poem of Isaiah 35:1-2. I think that this scribe checked the text of the great Isaiah scroll against another scroll and then copied the missing verses faithfully, but in the spelling system of the exemplar he consulted, not in the spelling system of the great Isaiah scroll itself. Now, Corrections by later users do not necessarily indicate that scrolls were read aloud. And this is probably, well, we can discuss that, unlikely for the sheet of 4Q 175. However, they do attest to the ongoing reading and study of at least some manuscripts. Many other manuscripts collect texts that would have been performed communally. For example, prayers, songs, hymns, blessings, words to be used in rituals, even excerpts of scripture to be used in liturgy. Some may have been performed at Sabbath, on which, as we saw, songs and blessings, and as we can read in Philo, etc., songs and blessings were encouraged forms or used forms of speech. Others are prayers for the morning and evening, prayers for festivals, or blessings and curses for the annual renewal of the covenant ceremony. Many of such texts are literarily characterized by first-person direct speech, often directed to God. In many of these scrolls, paratextual markers in the margins separate the different prayers or the different parts of the ritual. And perhaps not in this image, no. The function and contents of the prayers and hymns may be clear, even though some are really difficult. But what was the function of the scrolls that contained these prayers? It is perhaps unlikely that prayers or hymns which were collected in large scrolls were actually performed by reading from that same scroll. Rather, memorization of hymns, of fixed prayers and ritual texts is to be expected if all the participants would perform those texts. Now, just anecdotally, one of our predecessors as scroll scholars suggested that you could, if you would have 10 copies of a prayer text, that meant that there would have been no more than 10 people who performed that text, assuming, as often in churches nowadays, that everyone would have a copy of the text that they would have. However, the scrolls that we have with prayers and rituals differ considerably. For the collection of festival prayers that you see here, there's a skillful, almost calligraphically written parchment scroll, 4Q 507, left on the line, with a large bottom margin of almost 3 centimeters, which some take to indicate luxurious scrolls. But the same festival prayers were also included in a papyrus manuscript written on 2 sides, which collected 2 different works. Now, we cannot know whether one would bring along those beautiful and large scrolls for the purpose of reading aloud only one of its prayers. Alternatively, such scrolls may have been written for study or for recording the liturgical texts rather than for public reading. Now, this may be different for the 2 versions of a ritual of purification, providing instructions and liturgical texts for the purifications of individuals after corpse contamination, bodily discharges, etc. One version was collected with another work in a papyrus opistograph. One text, daily prayers, on one side, and a ritual for purification on the other side. But the other copy on the right of I put on the infrared, because if you take the color one, you will see nothing. It's just a dark brown fragment. The other copy was written on the backside of the skin of an apparently rejected manuscript of 4Q instruction. Now, writing on the backside of skin often gives poor results. There's all kinds of problems that you will have, and it is virtually always for writing exercises or for private copies. Now, since the rituals concern most of them concern the purification of individuals and spell out the words of their individual confessions, requests for forgiveness, and thanksgiving, one can imagine this specific private manuscript on the right side of the screen to have been used to aid memorization or even perhaps, well, we cannot prove that of course, as a written text to be consulted or even to be read out from the text out loud at such a ritual. You will see that there's a lot of perhaps improbable but little certain in what I'm saying. Now, the scrolls from the caves of Qumran refer mainly to communal reading and study. Yet, other finds from the Judean desert suggest that some families or individuals also possessed manuscripts. And a very special case of this is the two-piece fragment from the fortress Masada, conquered by the Romans in 73 CE. It was found in a casemate room together with loom weights and remnants of wood indicating weaving activity in that room. After the discovery, the two pieces were arranged incorrectly, leading to the suggestion that this is the end of a large psalm scroll. I demonstrated, as you can see here, that the two pieces should be joined, resulting in one small fragment. So even the way you play with the fragments is either a massive psalm scroll or a minute fragment. I demonstrated that the pieces should be joined, resulting in this one small fragment, less than 12 centimeters long. Of course, you cannot see the scale on this, but imagine 12 centimeters is this, and up to maximum 2.5 centimeters high, written in extremely tiny letters of 1.6 to 1.8 millimeters. It contains the Hebrew text of Psalm 150 in two small columns, at the right verses 1 to 3, 1 through 3, at the left the remaining verses 4 to 6. Some parts are lost, but the right column would have had only 6 lines, and the left column, as you can see in the transcription, and what is lost is in between brackets, etc., 5 lines. Now, the small size rules out that the original scroll was long. There may have been some preceding columns with other psalms, or this small scrap of parchment was all there was. But how was this small scroll or fragment used? The scribal features of the fragment are ambiguous. On the image, you can see many uninscribed spaces or facets in between the first halves or sticks. Now, such spacings occur more often in scrolls with psalms or other poetical texts and indicates how the text should be orally performed. But at the same time, scholars assume or generally state that scrolls with very small script would not have been used in public performance, probably thinking that you cannot read publicly from my tiny letters. The owner, man or woman, possibly a weaver, may have owned this fragment for private reading or singing, or simply as a material expression of faith and hope during the Jewish war. According to traditional paleography, its handwriting is typical for the second part of the 1st century Common Era. So this fragment may have been inscribed as early as the 50s or even as late as 70, when the Jerusalem temple was destroyed, or just before the massacre of Masada's defenders in 73. It has been, and then in my earlier text I connected that to the content of the psalm, but I won't go there now. It has been suggested that rich individuals may have owned large or even luxurious scrolls. But here we have an example of someone who possessed a small artifact with a small section of scripture, perhaps as small as one short psalm. Now, the Masada fragment is unique with respect to its small size and tiny script. But among the Qumran scrolls are also examples of short manuscripts with only one small section of a book, such as the beginning of Genesis, 4Q4, 4Q7, 4Q10, or the beginning of the book of Jubilees, 4Q216, some written in unskilled hands, all of which manuscripts might have functioned as either exercises or, more likely perhaps, as private copies before being deposited in the overall collections in the caves. We're coming to an end. It is only because of the discovery of the scrolls as material and textual artifacts, and our close examination of the writing on the scrolls, that we can recognize the large diversity of the production and use of scriptural and religious manuscripts. On the one hand, the great Isaiah scroll, with its long life of corrections, insertions, and restorations, encapsulates the importance and ongoing communal use of a book of scripture. On the other hand, the perhaps autographic copying of hymns or prayers or sections of scripture, whether by clumsy, less skilled, or more experienced hands, inscribes these copyists in textual religious communities. Likewise, the reading aloud of writing from book scrolls by priests or on Sabbath, as indicated on the two texts I discussed, is not only a communication of law or prophecy to listeners, but also echoes and ritually enacts earlier acts of reading aloud, whether by Moses, Ezra, or otherwise. Interestingly, the community rule, which describes a variety of meetings involving reading, study, and blessing, not once mentions the Sabbath or the special reading aloud from a book scroll on that day. Since one should read, study, and discuss according to the community rule, I leave it for future study after the reading of this lecture to discuss whether the meetings and vigils of the community rule were modeled on sabbatical meetings and thus also included reading aloud from scrolls, or whether in their daily meetings the study of scripture rather than its liturgical reading took central place. I thank you.
Thank you so much, dear colleague Tigchelaar, for this instructive lecture, indeed taking something from the past, but indeed giving us more lessons for the future. Thank you so much, and let's now continue with music in this celebration. So I happily give the floor again to Eli and Ewout, and now they will bring three pieces: Otje naast the Lord's Prayer by Nikolai Kederov, Parole ou Parole by Dalida, and Clair de Lune by Django Reinhardt. I give you the floor, and I invite you to lean back and enjoy.
Guess how much? Guess how much? 3 millimeter. 6, a tiny and easy and entirely realized readability. Orthographically and morphologically, copying Qumran for Q9 darkened, occasionally, considerably. 54, 34, 40, contrary, scroll, 40, flowers, fade, fragment. Different division, addition, major loss of its surface, 3 millimeter discoloration. Wit linnen geklede vegetariërs, perzen, gymnosofisten, Jupiter op Kreta, eten vlees, atleten streven, eten geest, heeft tegen eten van vlees, als in wit linnen geklede vegetariërs. Semblances of traces, similarly a trace, discolorations or faded ink or discolorations, semblances, similarly a trace, the reading is certainly basis for assessments. Somewhat firmer patterns, preserved fragments, damaged patterns, discolorations, ensemble, calculated correctly, reconstruct the columns. 2 columns follow the columns echad in honor of book production. Scribal practices and approaches reflected in the texts, catalogue of spirits, taal, photograph, shai, Samaritan, sometimes especially scribes, century sentences, Isaiah, an ancient user attempted. Thicker, nib, re-ink, intellectual. Hartmoed, al onderzoek, men maximaal stammen van later tijd zijn. Bijbelse Bijbel, Bijbelse boeken, Bijbeltekst, beschadigd Jesaja, belang, samenhang, maar ook men moet met erg op van de die doet denken, discussie deze 23 deel, kleefde, die de doorsnee, versteend, zodat losgesneden konden worden, damaged. An ancient user attempted. Lost, overwrite faithfully, century left this line empty. This transcription includes the textual identification, the new transcription inconsequential necessary corrections. Surface should secondary insertion, same style, sloppy spelling section, scribe grass. Strengthen, missing in, an, and, own, entirely. Al amar aval ki im atem asher ish hazot. Omitting tiny Elohim. Changed it to hey. Thought that the 4 letters, Lebanon levering alleen aan de oostelijke hemel, Henoch de synchronistische, hebben hetgeen hier het hey, hoe eens per maan, Sabbat van de sterrenhemel scheiden. Seizoenen zullen als tekens dienen. closing off with another of Shlomi's poems, Presentation. The texts I live in are fragments, ordered to frameworks of meaning. I live in their rhythm, their tongue is my words. I feel for their loose ends, where they break and collide. Set discontinued maps of storylines made up of gaps, of terribly self-contained voices, placed out of place, isolated in context. I fear my own voice.
So, and as we're humans, we celebrate gratitude not only with parole, but also with something that we can feel and give and live with. So I invite Professor Hindi Naiman, and also as an address from the other editors, to present you, Professor Tigchelaar, with a present that you can touch, that you can feel, that you can study, that you can read, that you can recite, whatever. I give her the floor.
Professor Mark Verven, previous rector and dean, whose inspired vision created a professorship in Dead Sea Scrolls research. Professor Dr. Florentino Garcia Martinez. Professor Dr. Benedict Lemline, Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies. Professor Levin Bova, and previous Dean, Professor Dr. Pierre von Hecke, Chair of the Research Unit of Biblical Studies, and Professor Dr. Johan Liemans. Colleagues, this evening we celebrate Professor Eibert Tigchelaar, an exemplary philologist. Your love of language, of production, and scribal work is unparalleled. And as a philanthropist, your love for people, Eibert, and for humanity, for students and for colleagues, and for scholars worldwide. If you can come up for a moment, Eibert. Can I invite the other co-editors to please come up to the stage? Thank you. Pierre's one of the editors. Pierre's coming. Missing Pieces, Essays in Honor of Eibert J.C. Tigchelaar. This is a festschrift in celebration of your research, your teaching, and your legacy. We are privileged today to present to you today with 631 pages, 38 contributors, 33 articles. Before turning to our co-editors, whom each will contribute something to this presentation today, I need to take a moment and honor the person without whom we cannot imagine these achievements, without the love, support, and lifelong commitment of Eibert Tigchelaar's partner, Dora Wolf. We honor you today, Dora, for your partnership and participation. If you could come up for a moment so we can give you a token of our appreciation. We now want to offer a few more words of congratulations to Professor Tigchelaar. Thank you. First, Mladen Popovic.
I'm going to keep this very brief. It's only 15 minutes. Eibert has been a very long journey. I don't know what to say. We have got to know each other in Groningen. Then when you move to the US, back to Leuven, Groningen. We speak sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes it's once a month or every week or whatever. When Dora and Annemieke ask, how is the other one doing? We always say, I don't know, we talked about work. But of course we do know how we're doing, and we also talk about those things, and yeah, what can I say? We'll just continue. But thank you very much for the scholarship and for the friendship and for everything.
Yeah, Eibert, thank you very much for everything. I remember distinctly the first time that we met in the Leiden office of Brill Publishers, where I just finished a research proposal and you told me, oh, I think this needs some more work. That was when I first discovered that you do set high standards, but working with you for the PhD and then also afterwards as a postdoc, I came to learn that it's really about responsibility, about taking responsibility for the quality of your own work, but also taking responsibility for a field where good work is the standard, where collaboration is standard, and where we try to work together to make each other and to make the field better. So I thank you very much for the standards that you set for me and also for yourself, and for the example that you are as a scholar and, mensch, as Pierre already mentioned. Thank you for everything.
Eibert, I just want to thank you for one thing now, actually, which is related to your lecture. So reading practices. Eibert is a very, very sharp reader, and that's maybe the way in which he has educated me, but so many of us, through his reading, which is sharp as a razor blade. And maybe to finish with a word from the scriptures, Divrei Chachamim kedor banot, the words of sages are like goats, like prickly things, like Eibert's comments and feedback and marginal notes, they keep haunting you, and actually long after you published, it's still coming back to criticize you, and this is the best gift that you can give to scholars, because we're never finished, and you're never finished, so thank you.
Eibert, I have the last word in this little troop of editors. I stand here principally as the chief editor of STDJ to say thank you for all that you have contributed to the series. But I also want to do a couple of other thank yous. Firstly, there are many, many people who work at publishing houses who often don't get the recognition that they deserve for what they contribute to our outputs. And Dirk Bakker, please, you too deserve a thank you present. Dirk has been sorting out the proofs for us. Brill, I think, owes an enormous debt of gratitude to Eibert for contributing to so many different series, journals, and various publications of all sorts in so many ways. For STTJ, Eibert hasn't realized that there's been a secret race on between him and me as to how many students' theses we can publish in the series. Eibert has won the race. So he's responsible not only for his own publications in the series and in several other Brill series and of course with other publishers, but for many of the other volumes in other series because of his input as advisor, mentor, and teacher. But I think Brill owes him an especial debt for being an open ear in all sorts of ways. And I think that in several respects, Eibert has been the strategist that Brill has relied on now for 20 or 30 years, so that the secret of Eibert's influence in the field is well beyond anything that we can perceive. And I use the term the field there again. His influence is enormous, very extensive. And I do wonder whether de Gruyter hasn't discerned this and thought that Brill was the very best thing to buy. So, on behalf of Brill, Eibert, thank you so much. And your Festschrift is in the correct series, STDJ.
Thank you, Jules.
So, having the final word in a celebration like this one isn't easy. You don't know beforehand what will come. You listen all the session through. You try to find some main points. And of course, it's never exhaustive. There's always a lot to say. But I started by saying that today we look back in gratitude, that we celebrate fulfillment, that we listen to the promise to the future, and that we gather in a network of friends and colleagues. And if I listened well, maybe taking up a little bit the technique of our musicians or performers, if I could also build a little bit of a word cloud, then I heard several special elements, both in Eibert's personality and life, as well as in his work. Starting with his life, I heard impact, which I think we're all convinced of today. I heard generosity. I heard a broad perspective, having began with a life in Kenya. I heard a bin Adam, a bin Florentino, maybe. And modestly, I'm very, very proud to add that I have been a little bit of a promoter for him too, you might remember, in submitting the application for your Pioneers Prize in Humanities. I was his promoter, and he got the prize, of course, to his achievements, but it makes me proud even today. If I think about other words, I heard amicitia Qumranica. I must admit, in biblical studies, some people joke, other exegetes speaking about the sect of Qumran continuing. But anyway, it is in amicitia, which is nice. I heard the field, also a word. And then turning to more words in your study, I heard reading, studying, learning, teaching, the whole right. Memorization, performance, reciting, text, and scroll, and I think we have had them all today. We read on your screens, we studied together with you, We learned, you have taught us. I hope we memorized a little bit of what we learned today. We had nice performances, recited, and we talked about texts and scrolls. And if I continue the word cloud, I heard the book, the scroll, the Torah, the re-inking, the replacement, corrections, additions, insertions, but also festival prayers, ending with this festive celebration today. As a dean, I do not want to have a full speech here at the end. It's my task just to conclude this celebration. But I have 3 more words to add. First, all of them are a thank you in looking back and looking forward. And all of them from one concept, namely the gratitude that results in deep and intrinsic joy. A first aspect is in this gratitude and joy is for myself being a companion in textual criticism. It was a road that we went together. Secondly, as a member of our research unit of biblical studies, we went the road together. But today, especially as a dean, not for myself, not for our research unit, but for our faculty as a whole, and I might add for the university as a whole, we say thank you for all that you have not only achieved as I started this session, but for all that you have been, all that you have meant to us, and all that you have learned us. So I have one message for all of you today. It's Eibert's own message by which he ended, citing the scrolls. He said, reading, studying, and discussing. So keep reading, keep studying, and keep discussing all that wisdom with all of us. Thank you, and thank you all.